There are definitely some important ways in which I don't feel like a local. This question of who are locals here. The history of my presence in Luxembourg is actually quite a complicated one. My family first came here in 1973, which, as you all know, is when the UK joined the EU, or I think it was the EC at the time. My grandfather had a job at the European Court of Justice, so he came over with my whole family. Then my mother, my mother was 2 at the time, but when she was sort of 18 or so, she moved back to the UK. She met my father. And then also when I was 2 years old, we moved to Luxembourg. And then I came back again when I was 9 after my parents had divorced. And then I was here from when I was 9 to when I was 18, when I went away to university. And then I came back in between my bachelor's and my master's to help look after one of my sister's children. And basically it's been like that ever since, sort of yo-yoing backwards and forwards between the UK and Luxembourg and occasionally other places. So it feels now like half of my home, and the other half is in the UK. I feel very much that I'm a person of 2 places. It always amuses me to think of this occasion shortly after my family moved to Luxembourg, when the Queen came to visit. So the Queen was coming to unveil the statue for the European Court of Justice, and I don't know who exactly, the court, I suppose, were looking for a young British child to give some flowers to the Queen. And they asked my mother, first of all. And my mother famously said, "I don't want to give any flowers to some silly old Queen." So they didn't give the job to my mother, they gave it to my aunt. And she was there, she was with the Queen. She comes up to her, gives her the flowers. The Queen takes the flowers, and then my aunt takes them back off her and goes, "These are for later." So when I went away to university in the UK, the thing I missed most was the forests. And I didn't realize actually that, and people who visit don't know, that Luxembourg is actually quite a densely forested country. And I just love about Luxembourg that most towns, they're just surrounded by forests. You can just walk out of them into the forest. And then I went to university and there's like not a forest for, I don't know, 100 miles around the town I'm in. The flip side is they don't have the sea. And as a Brit, I grew up with the sea all around me. And when I arrived here, I'm like, where's your sea, guys? So yeah, that's the thing of being, from 2 countries. Like always there's something missing, because the thing you've had in the other country that seems so vital to life is now gone. You always took it for granted, it's now gone. I think Luxembourg City is hugely underrated, actually. You arrive, as I do, on the bus from the Mullerthal at Kirchberg, and you get the tram, and you go over the valley there. You've gone past like the Moudam and all that. You go over the valley, and past the palace, and then you go down into the ground. It's like, wow, this is an astonishingly beautiful city that deserves to be, I'm going to say it deserves to be mentioned in the same breath as Venice and Stockholm and Amsterdam. It deserves to be. I've said it, guys. I would suggest anyone visiting Luxembourg take at least a day to go hiking in the Mullerthal. It does get called the Little Switzerland of Luxembourg, but personally, I don't know why, because I've also been to Switzerland and we don't have any like huge mountains there. Very rarely snow there. There's something degrading about saying we're the Little Switzerland. Like, no, we're not the Little Switzerland. We're the Mullerthal, and that's good enough. Thank you very much. I want the people in Switzerland to say we're the big Mullerthal. That's the way I want it to be. There are definitely some important ways in which I don't feel like a local. An illustration of this recently, I was talking to a Luxembourgish friend, and I realized that we were talking about like if we see somebody littering, dropping like a Coke can on the ground, would you intervene? And if I heard them speaking Luxembourgish, I definitely wouldn't intervene, because I'd feel like it's your country, I can't. What right do I have to tell them what to do with their own country? And that's a sort of strange realization, because as I say, my family have been here for nearly 50 years, so you'd hope by now that I'd feel like I had that kind of right. But actually, weirdly, sometimes I feel the most foreign when I walk into a room and they're all speaking Luxembourgish and they switch to English. They do it just for me. They switch just to accommodate some foreigners who've come along. They switch from their, not their first, second, third, in many cases not even their fourth language, but to their fourth, fifth language. I mean, it's insane. And I felt guilty, you know? Like, that's a special kind of guilt that I can feel here that I could never feel back in the UK. And so that makes that kind of language guilt makes me feel very foreign. Well, I'm sure I would feel more local if I properly spoke Luxembourgish and French. This question of who are locals here, when 50% of the population around about are foreigners, and even many of the ones who are officially locals, like me, are far more foreigners than they are local in some important sense. You can say, I think, that there are two types of locals, or at least two. Maybe, you know, maybe there are three or four, but whatever. Like, you can say, like, I grew up here in Luxembourg in one type of local community, which was the international community. It's a certain lens, you know, when I'm looking at it through one lens, I feel that I'm very foreign here despite having the nationality. Then when I look at it through another lens, I think, well, no, like, I'm part of a community that's rooted here in Luxembourg. It's an international community. I met even a tour guide, a Luxembourgish tour guide, who said to me, you know, I asked him this question about whether having all these foreigners in the country doesn't undermine the development of a Luxembourgish culture. And he said no. He said no, it doesn't undermine the local culture because it is the local culture. Foreigners are the local culture.